the leader of the temporal world embodies what Evola calls regality. And so it's not just a king, but the regal nature of the king is in the fact that he is in some way mystical and represents a bridge between the temporal and the transcendental. He is the nexus point at which the magical overworld meets the real world.
Yeah.
In the ancient mind, this is, right? He says, in the world of tradition, the most important foundation of the authority and of the right of kings and chiefs and the reason why they were obeyed, feared, and venerated was essentially their transcendent and non-human quality.
So is this the idea that for a king to reign, that king needs to have a sort of symbolic nature in the minds of those who are governed?
Yes. And in previous eras, you see this all the time. I mean, like in medieval Europe, the king was divinely ordained by God. In ancient Egypt, it was the pharaoh.
Yes.
In ancient Greece, ancient Rome, he was the Pontifex Maximus.
Yeah.
And the Pontifex means bridge builder.
Yeah.
Pontifex literally means bridge builder. But, you know, like, and he was the chief bridge builder between this world and the other world, you know? And so you can see that he's not wrong in describing how they looked at the universe. You know, the pharaoh was literally an incarnation, you know, the embodiment of the god on the earth. And the kings had literally divine authority. And this is important for later because the divine nature of the king represents his rank on the earth. And this is why, and he says it is because they were venerated because of their transcendent quality. This is why the king is sacred. You know, this is why he's in charge. It's the forces of the universe divinely ordain this person, and in him they make themselves present.
Would you say that this is also the reason why the king should not show himself very often to people? Should be a bit...
I mean, on a practical level, sure. You know, on a practical level, absolutely.
So people won't get the idea that the king is human.
Well, yeah, and that's what, like, look at the crowning of Queen Elizabeth II.
Yeah,
you know, the actual anointing is done in secret. You know, like you're not allowed to see it. But he points out that what this does is increases the ontological rank of the king. The king isn't merely a man; he is a man and something else at the same time. And it's the recognition of this ontological rank that is what people defer to. It's not just that he's powerful, because the king doesn't actually have to have an army to have influence and power, right? He is the king, and even, you know, in English, you like the word "king" is a powerful word, you know, when it's not being abused by people online. But he points out that this recurrent view of kingship is expressed in a variety of mythical and sacred expressions, and expressed in terms of what he calls immanent transcendence that is present and active in the world. So in a way, the kings are sort of like mortal gods.
Okay.
And this is why, again, in English folklore, the touch of a king was supposed to cure scrofula.
Okay, so the king is supposed to represent the transcendent
Not
order
represent.
into...
Not represent. He manifests.
Manifest.
He manifests a form of transcendence in his person. Because represent would mean it was absent in somewhere else, right?
Okay.
So it's important...
Okay.
I'm not being picky. It's genuinely an important way to view this. Because for Evola, the transcendental exists everywhere. Right, it's like a Christian view of God, but it can be summoned into reality, and one of that ways is in the divine kingship. And the victory of the king, the king, the things the king does have metaphysical significance. And so, for example, the victory of the king in battle is the most important thing, right? And this is what Machiavelli said: a prince should have no other thought but war. You know, it's the most important thing you do. So the first, in Evola's view, is the mystical aspect, and the second is the military aspect, because of course the transcendent has to come first, right?
Okay.
The most primary thing is the upholding of the sacred solar order. That's the most important thing, you know. And then the physical manifestation of that being routing your enemies and taking control of their cities and establishing law and order. That's all secondary, right? And in the victory, in the moment of the victory, a supernatural power is manifested in the king and, you know, flowing out through him. And so this is inseparably connected with the traditional idea of real and legitimate kingship. And so almost all legitimate kingships throughout history are predicated on some great victory. Right?
Okay.
They're almost all predicated like Alexander becomes legitimate because he defeats the Persian Empire, right? Because I mean, he may not have been legitimate. Philip of Macedon had another child from another wife. Olympia wanted it to be Alexander, and Alexander legitimizes himself by crushing Darius.
Yeah.
Right. So this is the sort of thing he's talking about. And it consecrates and gives witness to the solar triumphant nature of the king. And this sort of terrestrial power gushes forth from one king to another, guaranteeing an uninterrupted golden sequence of divine lineage. This is why it has to be the king's son, and the legitimate son. And then you've got the lineage is what becomes important. That's the thing about tradition. And honestly, I think there's something true about this, which is why we talk about the fact that Charles is descended from Harold Godwinson and William the Conqueror. The lineage is important, and it's this magical power that flows with it that was created by William.
I'm a bit Aristotelian about this, and I'm thinking that very frequently, as he says, that there is such a thing as kingship.
Yeah.
But in some cases, there is a deviation.
Yeah.
And it turns into tyranny.
Yes. And
very frequently, this happens with succession.
Yeah.
So, for instance, I was thinking of Pisistratus in Athens. That many people think that he wasn't that bad, but his son, Hippias, was abhorrent.
Yes, and that's and he in fact cites Aristotle in this chapter, because he would agree with you. He would agree that like that a king who is not legitimized by the divine order, by the transcendental order, will just be a tyrant. Will just be a thug, right? And so they are illegitimate, right? But a legitimate king becomes like the center of gravity of the civilization.
Okay.
He becomes like the pole around which the civilization, the axis around which the civilization revolves. And he even quotes Aristotle saying, kings enjoy their office by virtue of being the officiating priests at their community's worship. This is something that Aristotle said. So he's saying that the king is the most important religious figure in the civilization. Yeah. And he consecrates the entire civilization by virtue of being legitimate and being the center of gravity of it all.
So that is, again, by manifesting that I'm manifesting a transcendent order.
Yes.
In the world of becoming, as opposed to just governing for my own sake.
Yes.
Okay.
That's exactly right. And that's exactly Aristotle's position, right? He was doing it for the good of the community. But Evola is extracted from this a set of principles. It's not just Aristotle, he goes through all, but he upholding a particular kind of transcendental order is what makes the king legitimate. And so this means that we get to the doctrine of the poles. So the king takes on the value of a pole, which is an axis in the world. And that's what the scepter is supposed to represent. The king is the center of the universe. And the sitting on the throne is a sort of initiation ritual, which precedes the experience of becoming a god. But the important thing with this is the concept of stability. Again, mimicking the immutability of the transcendental, right? The king is an eternal representing, which is why, I mean, again, in Britain, the king dies, God save the king. You know, the king is dead, God save the king. There's no break in the lineage. There's no break in the stability of the order. Yeah. You know, the king is always the king, even if he's the previous king or the now king, you know, the present king. And so the point of this, he says, is to like imbue it all with an esoteric meaning. Right? Okay. It's magical. It's something magical in people's minds. And before the death of Queen Elizabeth II, I probably would have been like, that's nonsense. But after watching everything happening, I think I kind of see it.
Okay.
I think there was genuinely a kind of magic in there. The Queen is dead, long live the king. Yeah, I kind of get it. I think I actually kind of get what he's saying here. And I think it might be right. I think actually there is a kind of magic in all of this, which sounds ridiculous, but like, how else do you explain it?
Okay, question. Would he say that people owe unconditional obedience to the king? Because
only while the king is embodying the transcendental doctrine of right.
Okay, so that's conditional. So on the condition that the king manifests the transcendent order, we are going to obey. But if the king does not, the king is no longer legitimate.
He's a tyrant. Yeah. And he's not upholding the solar order.
He's no king.
No, he's no king. Yeah. The king is only really the king while he upholds this solar tradition. And if he doesn't, you know, he's not imminently transcending reality He's not bringing it into existence, right? In the person of him. And so he's not the king. The king is never the king unless he's doing this, and he's got to do it all the time, right? But anyway, the point of all of this, though, is the king creates a kind of axis of great stability and calm with which the rest of the civilization can revolve around. And honestly, in British monarchy, that is basically what it is. And everyone knows it. Everyone knows that the reason that everyone liked Elizabeth II is because she was this continual stabilizing presence in British politics.
Yeah.
That's totally true, right? And so the king creates this great calm which pacifies adversaries with its majesty rather than even needing to come to blows. And I think that people would genuinely say, yeah, Elizabeth did that. I don't doubt that people think that Elizabeth did that, right? And so in this context, words like justice and peace and anything like that, they don't have any secular meaning. They're bound up with this mythological state of affairs that are all contained in the ontological rank of the monarch, who is representing a magical transcendent order. And honestly, I think a lot of this we actually see present right now, in the death of the Queen and the accession of the new king. I think that's actually a fairly accurate description of what's happening. Wildly.
Okay.
It's crazy.
So you think it's close to what people describe as something higher?
Yes.
That you can see it and say, this is where I see that this is not just a facade, it's something high. There is something higher going on. And also, was there in the coronation, it seemed to me that at some point there was a young kid talking to the king, saying that I'm the representative. No, I think that was the word. I'm the representative of the divine order.
Possibly, I don't remember offhand.
Yeah, I think it was in the coronation ceremony.
I don't doubt, because they probably do think that.
Yeah,
they probably, at least they say it.
Or that I'm the emissary of God. Will you?
Yeah, they probably. I mean, in the Middle Ages, it's doubtless what they believed.
Yeah,
but this is what Evola is speaking to, and I mean, we can see it happening. Yeah. So in a way, he's not wrong. Obviously, a modern Republican is going to look at that and go, "What are you talking about?" But I actually think I understand what he's talking about. I think I've seen it.
Okay.
So anyway, crazy worldview aside. So he goes on to explain this is the point of things like sacred mysteries. The religious rites are imperative because what they do is every time you perform the rite, and the rite doesn't have a standard form. It's different for each civilization and different for each purpose. You've got various rites, so like victory rites, you've got sacrificial rites, you've got mourning rites for funerals, things like this, right? But when you do this, what he's saying is that you're kind of bringing the transcendent into place by performing the rite correctly. When everything goes right, everyone feels like it was done properly. Like imagine like messing up a funeral, right? You carry out the casket and you just drop it or something. Everyone will be like, oh my God, that's sacrilegious, right? But exactly, but why? But why? If it's all just material, if we're all just bodies, who care?
Yeah.
Right? But everyone knows that would be absolutely sacrilegious. And you would never do that. It was totally disrespectful. And there's something about the cosmic order that has been broken there in that example. And you'd be like, oh my God, that was the worst thing that could have happened. Well, why?
Exactly.
Why?
Yeah. The thing is, you cannot explain why by appealing to just material stuff, the way I see it. Yeah.
I totally agree.
Because you could say, well, it's just a carcass. There's no consciousness anymore. It's just a matter put together in a rotting body.
Exactly.
Why should you care about this rotting body?
Exactly. And everyone knows that would be abominable. Absolutely evil.
Yeah. And you hear then the advocate of scientism saying this is just because you're attached to that person and you're habituated into being attached to that person.
But it's not.
And actually all of what you're saying is a lie that you tell to yourself. Is you are blind to the influence of habit in making you think this way.
And I could easily refute that by saying, well, why would I be upset if it was someone I didn't know being treated that way?
Yeah.
Right? Because it's not about the individual attachment. It's about an order, a cosmic order that, these things should be done the right way and shouldn't be done the wrong way. And that's true. Yeah. And so essentially, I think Evola has them on these things. Yeah. I think he genuinely has them, which, again, I never thought I'd be saying, but he genuinely has a point here. So this is the point of the rites and the mysteries, is to reconfirm the cosmic order, and a funeral is a good example because everyone's probably been to a funeral when you get to my age, and you realize there is something at work at a funeral. You know, everyone expects a certain level of decorum and behavior and a certain kind of ritual, you know. But in the ancient world, they had lots of different rituals, obviously. They would sacrifice an animal before a battle to try and instantiate victory and hope the god would be with them and things like that. Or they would have ancient games to recreate the victories of heroes from ages past. Again, it's all about bringing these things back into the world, these, you know, cosmic memories basically back into the world, to make sure that everyone understood the divine order was functioning as it should, and that they were doing their part to uphold the divine order, you know, abandoning these things. Like the games in Rome were literally the last thing to be shut down out of all of Roman religion, and they persisted for centuries afterwards into the Christian age. And it's like, why? Because they knew they had to do it.
To watch the full video, please become a premium member at lotuseaters.com.